In this video, I am joined by Matthew Muir, friend of the channel. We're talking all about Imagineering today. We're talking Barbara Bouza, Joe Rohde, maybe even a little Bruce Vaughn. There have been some changes at Imagineering as of late that have been very, very interesting. I brought Matthew on to talk about it with me today on this episode of OG55. Welcome aboard, everybody, to another episode of OG55. In this episode, we're talking all about Imagineering. We're talking Barbara Bouza, Joe Rohde, all that good stuff. But before we dive in, Matthew, welcome back, sir.
Thank you.
It's always a pleasure having you on, Matthew. Matthew is joining us all the way from the UK. So, Matthew, I do appreciate you with the time differences and everything. I know it's for you. It's always these weird times. So I appreciate you taking the time to do this with us. So thank you again, Matthew. Yeah, so I'll link Matthew's his Twitter X account down below, and everyone make sure you go ahead and follow Matthew. Really passionate Disney fan, really knowledgeable in regards to all things Disney. You know, in terms of the corporate side, all that good stuff, film, studio, all that. So make sure you follow Matthew Muir. So Matthew, let's dive in. So it was announced a few weeks ago that Barbara Bouza will be leaving Imagineering. Now she's only been there, I think, for 2 or 3 years. And
yeah, it really feels to me just like a temporary solution.
You felt like she was a temporary solution?
Yeah.
It's starting to look that way, isn't it? She came over from Gensler, the architecture firm, who is actually heavily involved in this new park in Texas for Universal, Gensler is, which is interesting. But what are your thoughts on this? We've talked about it a couple of times on the channel, but we haven't talked about it with you yet, Matthew. What are your thoughts on Barbara Bouza leaving? You feel it's a temporary situation, but if you could dive into it a little further for us.
In my opinion, she was just a product of the Chapek era. She was just a product of trying to guide Imagineering through leaner times.
Well, that's a fair point. Guiding through leaner times, that's a good way to put it. I mean, absolutely. Do you think that this is something that was, like you said, it was a temporary move? Do you feel like this was temporary, like they knew from the beginning she was only going to be there temporary? Or do you feel like maybe Iger and maybe even Bruce Vaughn feel like she was underperforming? So they wanted her to...
Could be a bit of both, in all honesty.
A little bit of both. Are you encouraged by this news? I mean, that the accountability train is sort of making its rounds lately.
Actually, I am.
Okay, all right. And why do you feel encouraged by this?
Because it does feel like all the old talent that was brought in during the Chapek era, who did so much damage, all of that's being cleared out.
Yeah. No, it seems like, yeah, it does seem like I feel like they got the message. Look, I do believe that the current crop of Imagineers are very talented. I know a lot of folks feel like, you know, they're not, or whatever. I will not go as too far as to say they're not, because I do believe they have created a lot of great product with, like, Fantasy Springs over in Tokyo. That was the Imagineering team. You know, we have Zootopia and Arendelle. I think there's talented people there. But you're right, though, Matthew. I agree with you. I think that the veterans, though, all those veterans leaving, I think was bad. A bad move, a bad situation for Imagineering. I think that you have these very talented crop of younger Imagineers in there that are very green, but you need these veterans to sort of polish it up and to sort of be there with them a little bit, to kind of walk them through this a little bit. You know, not to say you got to hold their hand, but you want these veterans in there to kind of guide the ship. And it's really good to see, well, number one, Bruce Vaughn, who came back a while back. But now with Barbara Bouza leaving, we got Joe Rohde coming back as well, which is also very interesting. Now with Rohde, it was interesting because the announcement happened and all the outlets, including myself, it was kind of framed as like he's coming back to Imagineering. You know, and that was like basically through his Instagram message, it sort of looked like that was the case. Now he is coming back, but he's only going to be doing like these master classes for the Imagineers. What do you make of that?
I actually think it may be for the best, because maybe it only needs to be a temporary course.
Really? Okay. So you think that maybe he just needs to come in and sort of
Set the
show.
Imagineers on the right track and then head off when he feels.
That's interesting. Okay. Because, like I said, I mean, the current crop of Imagineers is talented. I mean, they definitely have chops. We've seen it. So maybe you're correct. Maybe you bring Rohde in, you have them kind of clean things up a little bit, polish them up, sharpen their craft, and then you leave. Now, do you think it's a possibility, though, Matthew, that maybe this is like a way to sort of get his foot in the door for something a little more permanent, though? Or you think it's probably just going to be these classes?
I'd say it could be a more permanent position, but it may just be a temporary one, maybe just a last blaze of glory.
Yeah. It's interesting. I really like Rohde. I love his passion. I love his creativity. He's a brilliant mind. Very unique individual, and unique in the best of ways. You know what I'm saying? But at this time, me personally, Matthew, I wish he would stay on a more permanent role, only because we have a few projects right now that really need him. We have big changes coming to Animal Kingdom, which is Animal Kingdom is his baby. I would hope he'd be part of that, and also we're getting some version of Avatar or Pandora at Disneyland Resort.
He was very much like the last of the old guard of Imagineers.
Yeah. So it'd be kind of nice to see him involved with those two projects. So the masterclass is good. You want to have that institutional memory passed on to younger generations. I think that's very important. And I don't want to understate that. I mean, that is very important. But it would be pretty cool to have him involved in some of these other projects. We'll see. We got the D23 fan event coming up in, August? And there might be some announcements. Who knows? Maybe they will announce a larger role for Rohde at that time. We'll see. Maybe they're saving that for the event. But in terms of like Bob Iger, though, right? You and I talk a lot about corporate side of Disney. It's interesting. Bob Iger is going through some stuff right now. It's not easy right now for Bob. He's going through that proxy fight. Peltz. We did a show yesterday with Seymour. We talked about Peltz, and look, we still think that Bob Iger and the board are ultimately going to have a victory here. But there's an increasing amount of support, with ISS and CalPERS and things like that. It's possible that Peltz gets a seat on the board or what have you.
If Peltz has won any kind of victory at all, it is at least in getting Disney to up their game.
Oh, that's true. And that's what I was going to actually ask you, is that because of these kind of struggles with on a big scale with Peltz and what have you, do you think that's maybe at least part of the reason why we're seeing all these aggressive moves with like Imagineering in particular?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting, and you're right. If it's pushing Disney in a better direction, that's a positive thing. I still don't want Peltz on the board. I don't think he brings much to the table, no pun intended.
Or Jay Rasulo.
Yeah, Jay Rasulo, that's a joke, man. Jay Rasulo, I've been a Disney fan for years. I've been in these news groups and message boards for literally decades, man. And I remember vividly the reputation that Rasulo had with the fandom back then. And it was not good. Okay, it was not good.
He was not like the One Disney initiative, like stripping the individuality of all the individual resorts.
Yeah, exactly. And I think he was actually, if I'm not mistaken, when J.K. Rowling approached Disney for the, I think our friend Jack from DSNY brought this up, and I think he's correct. But when J.K. Rowling approached Imagineering or Disney to have Harry Potter at the Disney parks, I think Rasulo was the guy in charge of that, and he dropped the ball on that, obviously, because he ended up going to Universal. So that's another.
I'm not sure who was worse though, him or Paul Pressler.
I would say Pressler. To be fair to Rasulo, I would say Pressler. Rasulo made a lot of questionable decisions, but Pressler was bad news, man. I mean, Pressler, the parks looked really bad. Really, there was a lot of maintenance issues, at least at Disneyland. I don't know how Walt Disney World was. I wasn't going to that resort at the time, but Disneyland was looking pretty shabby in the maintenance department, and he was closing stuff down. I mean, he was shutting things down. Like he was shutting, we lost our people mover. He shut down the submarine voyage.
Wasn't he hired like soon after Frank Wells passed away?
Yeah, it was in and around that time. Yeah, he was not good. He went down probably as one of the worst park executives that they've ever had. So yeah, to be fair, I don't like Rizzullo, but to be fair, I don't think Rizzullo was on that level of bad. He wasn't quite that bad, but Rizzullo made a lot of bad decisions. He was not good for the parks, and that's what's frustrating, Matthew, is that Peltz and even his fans, and if you like Peltz, you like Rizzullo, that's fine. But if Peltz and the fans are going to use his theme park experience as a selling point to sell people on the idea of him having a seat on the board, then I think his theme park record is fair game, right? And I see a lot of like, well, yes, he made a lot of questionable decisions while he was running the parks and while he was in that division, but he doesn't want to run the parks again. All he wants is a seat on the board. That's fine if he just wants a seat on the board. But if you're going to use his
and he was also the CFO,
and he was also the CFO. But if you're going to use,
all right as CFO, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was probably better as CFO than he was a park guy. But like, if you're gonna tout his theme park experience and his theme park experience, his record is fair game to talk about. And it seems like a lot of the Peltz people don't want to. It's very like convenient, It's like we'll talk about his theme park experience when it's like to get him on the board, but we won't talk about it when you want to bring up the One Disney initiative or anything bad about it, So it's interesting. But do you sense a little bit, speaking of like Disney in general and the board and what have you, do you sense a little bit of a refocus, so to speak? I mean, parks have always.
Yeah, I do.
Well, parks have always been a real big part of Disney, obviously. But for a little while there, the studio was really the front and center because we had, the streaming thing come into play, right? So do you feel, Matthew, that in recent times, though, like the parks have become like kind of the main focus for Burbank right now? They're really trying to zero in on these again, and that's part of it. That's interesting. You think that's a good thing, or you think they should kind of be a little bit more on the studio side?
I think they need to strike a balance between the two. They can't go too far in either direction. Yeah, we talk a lot about that on the show too, right? Where it's like you need that flywheel and you want to have that balance. It's tough, man. And a lot of people criticize, Disney and Bob Iger. And believe me, Disney and Bob Iger, there is a lot of criticism and a lot of criticism that's warranted, okay? A lot of people call me a pixie duster or shill. I'm really not. Bob Iger has done many things that have been detrimental to the Walt Disney Company. He's also done a lot of good things, but I think that it was a tough situation during the pandy and things like that, and it was a seismic shift in Hollywood where the way people consume media just completely changed with streaming and all that, and the sort of. I think a lot of people sort of miss that context when they're analyzing this stuff, and they think that like this is like Bob Iger's fault or even JPEG's fault, and really isn't all their fault. There was a lot of external factors that really screwed everything up for Disney and Hollywood in general, and all these studios are really trying to reel from this and trying to get back on track. If you look at Warner Brothers, they're going through it. You look at Paramount. Oh my God, Paramount's really going through it. Like they're all having this issue. So. Yeah, I mean, it's a tough call, man. It's a tough call. Do you think, though, Matthew, that eventually, in terms of, because we're talking most about Imagineering today, do you feel that with these changes, it's enough to kind of get back to the glory days, the golden era of Imagineering? Or do you think more needs to be done? I'd say what we're seeing so far is only really a starting point.
So, okay, so Matthew, you're running Disney. What do you do? What would you do to get it really going, to really, as Disney likes to say, turbocharge Imagineering? What do you do to improve it?
What I'd say is allow more non-IP attractions to be built first.
Really? Okay. So you'd go for more original attractions. Now, do you think, is there a concern though, Matthew, for you, like in terms of the normies? You think the general public would embrace that stuff, or do you think that that's a risk?
I think it is a bit of a risk, but a risk we need to take.
That's fair. I mean, well, yeah. I mean, look, you got to understand too, like here's the thing with risk. Here's the thing with risk. It is risky, obviously. When you go into something where you don't know the outcome, right? And with a non-IP, you're going into it without that built-in audience that you would have with a Frozen or a Marvel or what have you, or Star Wars. But I think with the riskier endeavors, like you actually, while there is more upfront risk, if that riskier move is successful, it actually pays off more. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, it was risky. Initially, it was risky to release Frozen, the first movie, because it wasn't an existing franchise. That movie could have went any which way. It could have flopped. It could have done like what Wish did. You know, they didn't know.
And same with Moana. They were taking an even bigger gamble with that film.
Exactly.
And you may actually know, during the pre-production of the film, Tamora Morrison, who voiced Chief Tui, he himself had a number of concerns about the way about the portrayal of the people of Motunui, but he eventually decided, no, best just keep my mouth shut.
Yeah, I mean, that movie was a huge risk too, and so those big risks.
And not to mention that they hired Dwayne Johnson of all people to voice Maui.
Yeah, exactly. That cost them a pretty penny, I'm sure. I don't know what he got paid for that, but Dwayne The Rock is not cheap, that's for sure. but it was a big risk, but that risk paid off, and that risk paid off massively with Moana and Frozen, So you make a good point here, where the originality stuff with like movies or even with the parks, it's a risk, and you can lose a lot of money, but you can also gain a lot of money. You can create new franchises going forward when you do those big riskier moves, So maybe you do create a new original attraction in the parks, and maybe that new original attraction becomes your next franchise, like Pirates was, or like Haunted Mansion is, or like a Figment. You know what I'm saying? Like, these original ideas can blossom into bigger things going forward. It's risky in up front, though. You know what I'm saying? It's riskier up front, but in the long run, it might pay off. So, okay, so you would do a little more risky, more risk taking, and more originality. Anything else that you would kind of add to this? Anyone you want to bring onto Imagineering, bring back to Imagineering that would help assist in this? If you could bring anyone back.
I would probably say bring back. Have you heard of this Imagineer before called Tom Morris?
I have. I follow that gentleman on Twitter, actually. A very nice guy.
Yeah, he's actually the man who designed, the castle at Disneyland Paris, and he decided it needed to look even more elaborate than the ones in the American parks.
Yeah, well, and he was right, because in Europe, there's a lot of competition.
God knows how many castles.
Exactly. So you got to really impress. And not to get too off on a tangent here, but I love what they did with the Disneyland Paris castle, because it really is the perfect balance. It has the charm of Disneyland's castle in a lot of ways, but it also has a lot of grandeur, like the Magic Kingdom's castle in Florida. It's that perfect kind of mix, and I just absolutely love it. I really want to go there one day. Matthew, you're in the UK. You've been to Disneyland Paris before, right?
Yeah, the last time I went though was in 2010, because the prices since then, even back then, were just getting out of control.
Yeah, I know. I'm telling you, Disney's been expensive for a long time. A lot of people don't realize that, but
many people seem to think, sadly.
Oh, I'm sorry. What was that, Matthew? I do apologize.
Far longer than many people seem to think.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I was working at a company in the early 2000s. I mean, we're talking like 2004, 2005, a long time ago, many moons ago. And I remember talking about theme parks to my coworkers back then. And my coworkers were like, I can't afford to go to Disneyland. I'm going to Universal. I'm going to Knott's, Even back then, I mean, we're talking 20 years ago. I mean, Disney's it has always been known to be the most expensive option, Now, that doesn't excuse Disney for the nickel and diming. I understand that. Since then, we've had things like Lightning Lane and Genie Plus and all this stuff.
But it's always been that way.
Yeah, but it's always been pricey, though. It always has. You're always going to pay.
They just need to be able to justify the high prices.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. If you make a great product, you can justify those high prices. When you go into Chanel, you're not gonna you're not gonna find much there that's gonna be very cheap or affordable, but you're gonna find a quality bag, right? For the ladies, right? You like Chanel,
Yeah.
you're gonna find a quality bag. It's gonna cost you though. It's gonna cost you like 10 grand or whatever it is, but it's gonna be quality. So it's like that with Disney in a lot of sense, where it's like, yes, it's a theme park experience that's gonna cost you a lot more than anywhere else, but the experience will be better. And that's how it should be, ideally. Now, that doesn't always work out that way, but ideally, that's how it should be. But I will say this, though. Universal is catching up, though. It's catching up. We were at
In terms
Universal.
of the nickel and diming.
Oh, yeah, they got that. They got that, too. But even just the pricing in general, man. Like, I went to Universal with Theme Park Wizard and our good friend Michael Ebba. And recently, and I'm telling you, man, I like the Harry Potter land is beautiful. We love it. But it's like, we paid like, $15-20 for like a beer, and like it's pricey there too. The tickets are the food and merch options are just as pricey as Disney and things like that. But I would say, just to be fair though, I do believe while Universal is catching up in the high pricing, Disney still is higher. It still is more expensive overall, but it's crazy. But before we close it out though, Matthew, like, overall optimistic, pessimistic about Imagineering? I mean, you feeling a little better lately about it with Rohde coming back,
Yeah,
and
what Ian is promising.
It's promising. Yeah, it's promising.
I'm cautiously optimistic at this point.
Yeah, actually, real quick though, one last thing I want to ask you too. Lake Nona. So they canceled Lake Nona. Any chance that's coming back? Because now they have a settlement with Disney and DeSantis. They're working together, so to speak, on that board. You think there's any chance Disney builds a Lake Nona Imagineering office?
No, I don't think there's much point. They can easily just have most of it from California.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. Crazy stuff. Matthew, it's always a pleasure having you on, brother. And we'll have you on again very, very soon. I want to have you on, as much as possible. Whenever you come up with a topic or an idea that you want to discuss, just let either myself or George know, and we'll have you back on. But
Thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And everybody at home, make sure you follow Matthew. I will link his Twitter and his Instagram down below. Make sure you follow him. He's a very, very passionate Disney fan. We love Matthew. Matthew Muir is family here at OG55. So make sure you show him all the love. Matthew, thank you again for joining us. And everybody at home, thank you so much for watching. Comment down below with everything that we've discussed today, whatever you want to discuss, whether it be Barbara Bouza, Joe Rohde, Imagineering, this new direction, that Disney's going in with kind of focusing more on the parks away from the studio. We would love to hear from you and all your thoughts down below. Thank you for watching OG55.
세상은 누구에게나 공평하게 추악해. 개틀 것 같았어.